You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at AMO, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. Before I get into today's guest and today's episode, I will say that I missed the consistent push of an episode in the last month. And normally I would release these every couple of weeks, and I missed a fortnight. And the reason I missed a fortnight is because I've been really busy working on some really exciting things across a range of different projects that I'll be sharing more about in the coming weeks and months. But in case you're not already registered to receive information, make sure you are subscribed to the AMO newsletter at agilemanagementoffice.com/subscribe, because you'll be the first to know and get all the insights and all the giveaways, goodies, and information as well. So make sure you're checked in and subscribe. So now on to today's guest, who is someone who truly knows what it means to lead from the front and bring others with her. Let me introduce Amanda Blesing, a former CEO turned Fempreneur, now a sought-after executive coach, speaker, and mentor. Amanda is an expert in career acceleration, leadership presence, and personal branding. But what really sets her apart is how she helps high-performing professionals promote themselves with confidence without the cringe. We all could use some help in that space. She's on a mission to help more talented individuals be seen, heard, and recognized, not just for their hard work, but for the value that they bring. Her blogs spark conversation, her webinars earn rave reviews, and her one-on-one mentoring has helped countless leaders step into their power and own their space. From navigating imposter syndrome to crafting an elevator pitch that actually lands, Amanda brings powerful insights and practical strategies to the table. And today, she's here to share them with us. So please join me in welcoming Amanda to the show. Amanda, thank you so much for joining.
Fatima, I'm delighted to be here.
It's been a while. I think I've been following your journey online and seeing you pop up regularly with all the insights and thoughts you're sharing and knowledge, and we really never connected until now. So I'm really excited. There's lots to cover, and I guess the general audience here will probably appreciate some of these insights because it's not topics we normally cover. So I think that's going to be really exciting for them.
Oh, I'm excited about that because sometimes when I speak about my own things, just like you and your listeners, we are so close to our own expertise that we forget that other people find it interesting. So I'm really excited that we're new, we're going to be discussing interesting things, and that you're excited about hearing some of what I have to share.
And I'll make sure that I ask you some questions for my own selfish benefit, because I know you have some really good wisdom to share. So let's start there. Why don't you give us a 2-3 minute background about where you started your career and your experience, and sort of what brings you here today in terms of like your career journey?
Great. So I have a really diverse background, and initially I used to apologize for that. But in actual fact, I think now in more, we live in 2025, and I think it's okay. It's normalized to be a multi-potentialite or a multi-passionate. It's actually normalized, and I'm a really big advocate for having a broad base in your career. However, my own career, I guess the career pathway started in the association sector, the peak body sector, and I started working. I transitioned from the fitness industry into the peak body sector, in the peak body for fitness professionals, and so that's where it started really. And I loved that. I was running conferences, I was running trade shows, I was getting exposed to all the best practice and new ideas and amazing global speakers in actual fact because of the conferencing. But my career then sort of progressed through the association sector. There was the fitness professionals. There was a time when I was running an expo in cinema and movies and things like that, and film. And then I went to the Law Institute of Victoria, where I ran their PD department, Insurance and Finance Professionals Institute, Global Foundation. And then perhaps my last executive role was as the CEO of SOCAP Australia. Now, the one thing that all of these peak bodies have in common is that we help professionals be more professional. We were providing those opportunities for professionals to showcase their career, showcase their expertise, to stand up in front of peers and say, actually, here's a case study I'd like to share. And so, or, here's a project that I worked on that's worthy of speaking about. And one thing I noticed was that all throughout this, when we'd call for papers, 10 men had put their hand up and only one woman. Or I'd call for award nominations and the women were running around nominating their junior staff, which is the right thing to do, in terms of sustainability for the sector. But perhaps within worn out, or maybe that was code for imposter syndrome, maybe weren't then ready or didn't have enough time to write their own nomination. And all of a sudden I went, you know what, I have had years and years of experience in helping men and women stand out, showcase their careers, feature, build their visibility, build their brand. I think I want to do this specifically. I focus predominantly on women, although I do have a few male clients. And yeah, it's incredibly rewarding.
It's so interesting. It's always good to hear where something starts, and I think it's very interesting because the culmination of the different skill sets, I can see how they would help people. Like, if I think back to my early years, a lot of leaders or people are thrust into leadership roles, and they're really not given any guidance, support, training. I mean, unless you put your hand up to go and do some sort of 3-4 day training, or you do an MBA, there's not really much out there. How has that sort of trajectory for leaders changed from when you started doing this to now? Have you seen more opportunity out there for leaders to learn some of these skills?
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? That so much, and we talk about it a lot in, in learning and development around how, often people are promoted because they're good at their skill set and they're promoted into a management or a leadership position, but not necessarily given the training or understand that leadership is not just leadership. There's all this learning how to influence, learning how to navigate the politics, learning how to it's important. You've got a personal brand, whether you like it or not, whether you want one or not. And you've got to lean into that. Learning how to showcase and represent your organisation. So no, none of those things still aren't taught particularly well. I think we, as a society, we still value sitting at your desk and doing hard work. It's a cultural narrative, certainly here in Australia, and I'm pretty sure elsewhere. We still really value sitting at our desk and doing hard work, and we still look a little bit skeptically at those people who are going out for the lunches and networking and schmoozing, even though the research shows that well-networked CEOs actually deliver better company performance. Hello, go figure. But we don't teach networking, and yet it's an essential skill. So I'm not
Oh,
sure if that answered
yeah.
your question, but I think it's worth talking about because it's something, it's this stuff that I work on, and this area that I work on, not necessarily strict leadership, but it's really important to your career as a leader.
100%. I think you're bang on with regards to like the networking. People underestimate the value that that brings for, like you would mention brand, which I wanted to touch on in a second. But just the importance of that networking and building that. But a lot of people are actually too afraid, to your earlier comment around imposter syndrome, probably too afraid to step out, I guess, of their comfort zone to go into these environments and into these situations. What would you say to someone who maybe is feeling a bit like an imposter and doesn't, maybe has the skills, but doesn't feel confident enough to step outside, step over that line, so to speak?
It can feel really threatening if you are an introvert or you're worn out, exhausted, got a dose of imposter syndrome. Maybe you've been promoted really fast and you're doubting your seat at the table. You don't know why you're there and other people are questioning you. Or maybe you're speaking up in meetings and no one's listening to you. All of that can really undermine your confidence and make you really nervous about putting yourself out there. So in terms of getting over that, one of the things in terms of avoiding imposter syndrome, I think we need to look after ourselves better and stop over proving ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
If we're no one promotes the worn out, flustered executive up the back of the office. Sometimes they're doing all the work, but no one promotes the really worn out, flustered executive up the back of the office. We tend to promote the person who's a little bit more like the swan. Maybe your
Hmm.
feet are paddling madly underneath, but you're at the you're swanning around. However, we do need to lean into that and sort of learn some skills about becoming more visible.
Mm.
Seth Godin said something really wise once, and I really remember it. It was like when you're starting your journey, and I think it was with relation to public speaking. He said
Hmm.
that the first person that you publicly speak to, start with your dog. And what he meant was start small. And it's the
Yeah.
same with networking. No
Yes.
one says you have to go to the biggest and highest profile networking event and throw yourself in and try and meet people. Meet yourself where you're at. Start
Mm.
small. Maybe
Hmm.
start with the smaller groups or start with peers or start where you're more comfortable. Learn some conversational skills. Have a nice little elevator pitch ready to go so you can introduce yourself in a comfortable way that it makes you feel confident. And aim to get 1 or 2 business cards, not 10, because
Hmm.
quality conversation works really, really well.
Mm.
So I
And
hope that's helpful for your listeners.
for sure. I mean, you never really know how to tackle imposter syndrome, but I think your examples there are really helpful, particularly even as someone who's gone through this journey myself. You never think, you're enough, or maybe you're over analyzing, you're being a bit of a perfectionist, and those sorts of things do creep up on you, and then make you feel like that, despite that background you've got. You talk a lot about in your work about the fempreneur. What's the fempreneur?
So, all right, I love the term fempreneur. I am a fempreneur. I work in the fempowerment space. I'm an entrepreneur who predominantly works with women. So, I'm passionate about gender equity, helping women win pay rises, promotions, better opportunities. And often women will reach out to me when they've had that aha moment.
Mm,
Like, oh my gosh, I've spent my entire career making other people look good, but I haven't done the same for myself.
mm,
So that's where I step in, and I help them develop a targeted and powerful approach to navigating this next phase of their career. And my goal is to halve their effort, but double their impact, because I think women are busy enough. There's a
mm,
lot of well-meaning poor advice out there that actually doesn't necessarily work for women.
mhm,
Yes, I had one client told to go and straighten her hair before she would be taken seriously. I had another client told by a manager that if she was serious about a promotion, she should probably consider getting Botox. Like, both of these bits of feedback really undermine your confidence.
mm,
This is why I'm passionate about what I do,
mm,
and that's why I step into the fempreneur space. I work in fempowerment. I predominantly work with women, and I help them step into the bigger arena, navigate pay rises, promotions, better opportunities. And I'm a bit of an entrepreneur.
mm. And then like thinking about those examples you just gave, that's just going to make people like those examples retreat. And you talk
Yes.
a lot about I can see your new book recently, your Invisible to Invincible. I would envisage that those women and or men in those situations where they're being challenged like that or given this unconstructive criticism, that they then want to retreat and become effectively invisible. How do you help them regain their confidence?
And you're absolutely right. That sort of feedback just chips away at your identity. It chips away at your confidence. It does. It makes you want to like. If you don't like who I am as a person, how am I ever going to get ahead? It makes you feel helpless.
Mm,
So the work I do really is a lot around uh, understanding exactly what your brand is, understanding exactly how you're coming across, like getting specific feedback with behavioral examples. We don't want feedback that's subjective. We want feedback that's really object. And we want feedback that's couched in ways that's about helping us get to the next level,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily feedback about how you can do your job better. You probably get enough of that. You
Mm-hmm.
probably get enough of that at work. So the feedback that I work on with you on, or with my clients on, is how to get you to the next level. So the feedback is always couched in that way. And we want to, focus on the process, give feedback about the process, the policy, the output, not the person. And that
Mm.
sort of feedback about appearance, it's missing the point.
Yeah.
It's missing the point. So perhaps the point, I don't know, I'm wondering, I don't really know, but let's talk about the curly hair one. So the woman who was told she needed to straighten her hair, well, the feedback might have been about, should have probably been about working on how she communicated in meetings.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Rather than feedback about something about curly hair, because I think might have had something to do with she was coming across a bit wild and too energetic for the executive circles in her organizations.
Mm.
So that's more about communication
Yeah.
rather than curly hair.
Yeah, exactly. So aesthetics is just an easy way to,
Ah,
it's a cop out fundamentally. And like you said, they're probably trying to communicate something else. They just don't know how to do it.
that's exactly right. And we've all
Mm.
got little blind spots. So feedback is really, really helpful, but feedback about personal things like that is really unconstructive.
Oh, 100%. And so you mentioned Seth Godin, king of marketing and branding and all those things. One of the things that I hear a lot is around branding. And often I think people don't really understand what branding is or what your personal brand is. And I think sometimes people feel that the personal brand and putting yourself out there and sprinkling yourself out there may come across showy or just really conceited in the way that, it presents itself. So can you tell us, so those that are not clear, what is a personal brand and why is it so important regardless of what you want to do in your career and life?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk about two principles. I'm really glad you raised that because it's really important. And we've all got a brand, whether we like it or not, whether we want one or not. And we get to choose, though, whether it's a Ford or a Rolls Royce. And that's what, I want us to step into to the space of, okay, let's choose what we want our brand to be.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we show up for the job we want, not the job we have? How do we present ourselves? What are the topics we're talking about? Who's in our network? How do we showcase our experience and the typical problems we solve, the
Mm-hmm.
difference we make, and the value we add? So personal brand is one thing. It's to do with reputation. It's to
Mm-hmm.
do with our results. It's to do, even our CV and LinkedIn goes into personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's another aspect which I think fits into the self-promotion piece, and this is positioning. And
Mm-hmm.
I think people sometimes, like, they're on LinkedIn going, I don't like the way people are saying, look at me, I've just won an award. Well, that's pure self-promotion.
Mm-hmm.
But self-promotion and positioning that go together really well is when we take the self out of self-promotion and stay in service instead. So I too, sometimes I'm feeling exhausted or just worn out, and I'm like, I do not want to go on LinkedIn anymore. Oh, I'm so tired. I don't want to put myself out there in case someone says something a bit snarky at me or as a negative comment that I don't know how to handle, or I just can't deal with it, or I've got nothing good to say. And so then I pick myself up by the bootstraps and go back to my book, and I practice what I preach, and that's take the self out of self-promotion. How might this content, how might what I share be helpful to my network?
Mm-hmm.
So delighted to share that I just won this award for gender equity. This is a pretend script or post. Delighted to share that I just won this award for in the gender equity space. Here's three reasons why these awards are really important. It does this, it does that, it does that. What do you think? And that would
Mm.
be a really good self-promotion positioning post. It
Yeah.
positions you as an expert. It provides a bit of insight, some thought leadership, maybe even a how-to. Here are
Mm-hmm.
three ways you could nominate yourself for an award. So you can see how you can do it. Just take the self out of self-promotion and stay in service.
Mm. Love that. Stay in service. I think it's so important, particularly on platforms like LinkedIn, which are absolutely flooded with content and all sorts of content. You mentioned something really important that I've struggled with over the years, and as you know, you continue to grow in the work we do, in our podcast, in or speaking, as you've spent a lot of time doing negative comments. So a lot of people are either going to be in two camps. They're either going to be in the camp where they don't put themselves out there at all because they're afraid of what, in the words of Gary V, Sally Happy Pants over on Twitter is going to say, or they just limit themselves because they're impacted negatively by a negative comment. Thoughts on that, and what's been your experience?
Negative comments. I like LinkedIn because there are fewer negative comments. There
I'd
are
agree.
not, let's say that they are still there, but they are fewer.
Yes.
I think it is a professional platform. I highly encourage my executive clients use LinkedIn. There's guardrails. Also, if someone says something a bit snarky, it tends to impact negatively on their career, not yours.
Yes. Yes. I'd agree with that.
And,
Yes.
and I think that safer environment that LinkedIn provides is really important for those beginning their branding journey, perhaps thinking about sharing some thought leadership, perhaps they're even thinking about posting your way into the job you want, not necessarily
Mm.
the job you have, being
Hmm.
strategic about the content that you post, aligning it with your career aspirations. But I think yes, there will be some negative comments. If they're really bad, you can delete them. And that's a relatively new feature on LinkedIn. You didn't used to be able to do that. So you can just delete the comment if it's really bad. You can report the comment. There will be a time when someone uh, may comment negatively on your content. And I think the trick is to be curious if they
Hmm.
do and
Hmm.
ask a question back. Sorry to hear that that's been your experience. Have you found any solutions? Like, thank you so much for your insight. I did not realize that was the situation. I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about that. So I think that being a little bit curious, a little bit of graciousness in the face of some of the negative, or just ignore them,
Yeah.
because the less attention you pay to really negative comments, the better it is. I do think though that sometimes we're a little bit worried that lots of people see our content.
Yes.
You should be so lucky. When you post on LinkedIn, in actual fact, it's only shown to about 9 or 10% of your network who are on at that time. So if you post, you don't have a big network and you post on LinkedIn, it's not shown broadly to everyone first. It's shown to your network first. If your network engage within the first 2 hours, and they might like, they might comment, they might reshare, and that's the gold standard. You actually want that. If your network respond, and that LinkedIn treats that sort of as an endorsement of your content, that it's quality, that it's worthy of being on the platform, it's worthy of being on the feed, and then it shows it to more people. But initially, you're
Mm.
probably only going to be seen. Your post is only going to be seen by your network.
I think it's really good advice, and it's not black and white as you articulate. So I think the curiosity, you're right. They might be asking something that may come across offensive, but maybe they've misunderstood. So I guess going in with that approach is really great. As you said, you can respond and after that point decide not to engage further. And then obviously you got the option of deleting on any platform really. But I think it's good to, yeah, just be curious because a lot of times there are some comments that come through. I've certainly had them. I'm sure you've had them where they may have identified something in your comment or your post or your piece of work that you may not have considered. And they may have some thoughts that really shape or reframe what you've articulated. And I've seen people take conversations offline together to deep dive into it so it becomes constructive. So I think that's, yeah, definitely some worthy advice.
Yeah, I
I
really
just,
like that approach, Fatima, actually. That's a really good approach. Offer to take the conversation into the DMs, because I think that that's right. I too have shared content and it's entirely been taken out of context or
yes,
entirely was not what I meant. And I was
yes.
like, and sometimes because I will repeat content every now and then, like, a couple of years later, I'll reshare. Sometimes it was a bit of content that was really well received 2 years ago. And then now it's getting all the wrong sort of attention, and the conversation is, the comments are just like going, really, I'm spending a lot of time responding and reframing. And if that happens, I find the best approach is like, just delete the post. It's
Yeah.
okay. You're allowed
Yeah,
to,
100%.
respond, clarify your point, this was not my intent, blah, blah, blah,
Mhm.
and delete the post.
Yeah,
You don't
100%.
need that in your day job.
No, absolutely. And like I said, you can respond to things sometimes, but I mean, when there's not a quality in response or a comment, I'm not going to give it time and attention. So,
Good.
um, I wanted to just touch on one more question around branding that I'm curious about. So, you've developed an elevator pitch formula. Now, we hear that in business all the time. What's your business elevator pitch? But what is an elevator pitch formula? Can you kind of explain it to us and tell us how it can be tailored for different audiences?
I love elevator pitches. I know that that's not necessarily popular, and some people are like, "Oh, elevator pitches, they're dreadful." But they are, when done well, they are fun, they are playful. I did one for you earlier today, and you may or may not have recognized it. But I've got a few formulas that I use. The formula that I will share with your listeners today is um, what are the problems you solve, the difference you make, and the value you add. All right, that's the basic framework. What are the typical problems you solve, the difference you make, and the value you add? So of course you're going to say, hi, I'm Amanda Blesing. I'm the founder of the She Suite Club, a whole heap like a leadership coach, but just for women. Uh, when you wake up one day and you go, oh my gosh, I've spent my entire career making other people look good. That was my problem. Yeah.
Mm, hmm
Well, what I do is provide a strategic approach and powerful approach to branding to halve your effort but double your impact. All right, where that was your problem, difference you make, and then the value you add is
hmm
where you might tell a story or a case study. So recently, I worked with a client, and I am delighted to say, after working on her interview, her CV, a number of role plays on preparing for curly questions and navigating misassumptions or bias in the interview process, making sure she came across in the right way. She was appointed CEO of a very high profile organization.
Wow. That's really good. And you're right. Now I think back to what you said at the beginning, which is a very eloquently put introduction, I would say. And it wasn't a lot of waffle. We've had a few of those where people you just don't really know where to start. But I think it's important the way you've articulated it because as you said at the top of our interview that you've done a lot of different things and your experience depth and breadth is broad. So I think that helps. What do you suggest when someone who, for example, like me, I run a small business, I work in corporate, I have a not-for-profit, all of those sort of things, do you focus in on that a specific problem depending on the person you're speaking to? Would you summarize and include all of those? How would you approach that?
Yes, you've got to be really specific. So you need to know who your audience is.
Hmm
So, if you're going to a networking function, you may consider the networking function that you're going to.
hmm
So the example that you give would be really tailored for that audience. Yeah, I think that's just smart. Just like you would have if you were having a regular conversation, being
Yeah.
able to tailor your pitch based on, like for yourself, who are the clients that you might want to win from this activity? Yeah.
Yes, okay, that makes rather than just what some people do, say and spray, and then you get quite overwhelmed with you don't know where to hook into for what they've introduced or what they've said in their supposed elevator pitch. So, I think that's worthy advice. You've done a lot of speaking. I was looking
Yes.
at your profile this week, and you've had numerous speaking engagements and done a lot of work in that space across different organizations. What is the number one or top one or two questions that are the most commonly asked?
So, question from the audience for me.
Yeah, from the audience.
Oh, that's a good one. All right. So, to be honest, the elevator pitch question, it's all people are really curious about creating their own elevator pitch. I often get that one. And I often get the question about, how are we going to fix gender gender inequality. What can we do?
Mm,
I think that people do feel helpless. I think women feel a little bit helpless. And I know that our male peers sometimes don't know how to help. So it's actually a really good question.
mm,
And I think it's relevant for everyone. How can we fix it? And do we, sometimes it's, do we really want to? But how can we fix it?
mhm,
It's a systemic issue, but that shouldn't stop us trying, or shouldn't stop us doing our own, playing our own individual part. But it is a
mm,
systemic issue. And until uh, corporates, organizations, companies really examine policies, processes, and really unpack what's going on, gender equity is a long way off.
mm. Do you think it's improved over the last 10, 15 years?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely been progress.
Mm,
Definitely been progress. Although, because I work at that executive level, I tend to work with C-level executives. At the very, very top, there are still very few female CEOs in the ASX listed 300. So we've still got a long way to go,
mm.
unfortunately.
I
There's
did hear,
definitely more women in earlier, lower down on the rung. There's
yes,
definitely more women earlier in the rung. And one of
yeah,
the statistics that I was really surprised about the other day that I learned was that in major cities around the globe, what's really interesting at the moment is young women are out earning young men. Now, that's not an ideal either.
yes.
Equity.
Yes, yes. I did actually hear that on the Diary of a CEO podcast not that long ago, or at least in the UK and the US. So it's interesting that it's, yeah, not just, it's more universal, it seems, in a lot of countries at the moment that that's
Mm.
happening.
Look, of course, I'm going to advocate for women to get more money. I'm glad that young women are getting more money. It's fantastic. It's great for society. But gender equity, pay equity, I think that that's what we're really fighting for.
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably talk a lot about that and spend a lot more time, but I am conscious that I know that that can be a political conversation that people are not necessarily always aligned on. So I think we'll let the politics play out and let them work through that. You did in your early speaking career have a bit of a mishap. You said it didn't go as well as planned. Tell us what happened, where were you, what went wrong?
Well, it was in the very early days of my speaking career, and I had been booked to speak in Singapore, but this was my practice gig before I went. So I'd been booked to speak in Singapore. I was really, really excited. It was the oil and gas industry. They had a special women's conference as an adjunct to the main plenary. And I was really excited to go and speak. And I thought, well, I'll just manufacture a few audiences closer to home. So one of my former board members from my former executive career, one of my former board members said, I will bring all my staff in. And they rated me. They thought I was pretty amazing. And they were like, we'll bring all our staff in and you can practice with our staff. Well, I was so nervous. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself. Do you do that too, Fatima? And that
I
yeah.
did, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
I put a lot of pressure on myself to be perfect because in my role, you might remember I had planned a lot of conferences. So I had seen the best of the best and I'd booked and briefed more speakers than most people have had hot dinners. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to be perfect.
Mm,
And quite the opposite was the truth. I spoke so fast
mm-hmm.
because I'm passionate about my topic and I had so much content to get through. We
Yes.
got to the end and I could see these blank faces and everyone left the room, just dead, dead face. Everyone just left the room, at an appropriate time, but no one came and said anything and everyone just left. And I was like, whoops.
Mm,
It was a telling sign, but hey,
yes.
let's face it, it was a practice session. It wasn't a paid speaking gig. And I think that that was also really important, but it gave me great feedback.
Yes, 100%. I can find myself speaking quite fast a lot of times, so I experience that. And I had a similar situation about 15 years ago where I got asked to speak at an event, and I just recall it going so badly that partway through, it was sort of like a two-part speaking engagement. I just felt like running the fire alarm in the building because I just felt like being swallowed up and spat out. It was just horrendous because the right preparation hadn't happened. And like you described, we tried to go through all the content. It was a disaster. So what did you take from that and I guess implement to perhaps even on the content side to improve moving forward? What did you put in place to fix that so that it didn't happen again, clearly?
Well, it was really interesting that I had provided too much content because having booked and briefed a lot of speakers in the past and seen a lot of conference speakers, I had seen a clear difference.
Mm,
In fact, it was a gender difference. The men would not necessarily jam pack their conference presentations full of as much content and would generally engage with the audience more. And the women, in our desire to prove our worth, we were jam packing our content. So there, I made the exact same mistake I had been observing for years. So that was the big takeaway for me. Slow
mm,
down and have less content. And in
mhm,
actual fact, focus on connecting with the audience, engaging, making sure the audience feel that seen, heard, and valued. Because
mm.
in actual fact, that is the key message. I want my clients to feel seen, heard, and valued, and that's often why they work with me because they don't feel seen, heard, or valued. So I need
Mm.
to treat my audience with the same respect.
And so I can see that you wrote a lot about that in your book. Tell us a little bit about the premise behind the book and where the idea come from and how that differs to your other books.
Okay, so this book, there we go. This book, Invisible to Invincible, yes, that is me on the front cover. You might remember I mentioned I had an early career in the fitness industry and I taught yoga. So yeah, that is me on the front cover. And we had a lot of
Well
fun with
done.
we had a lot of fun with the photographer, creating and getting that image. Then my third book that's going to be coming out soon, it will not have as creative a photo. However, the idea came, so this book is a self-promotion handbook. So it's all about how to self-promote, particularly for women. I talk about the challenges that women face when they are more visible. You know, when we put ourselves out there, we run the risk of being criticized. We're damned when we do, yet doomed when we don't.
Hmm.
However, you know, it's a really practical handbook. But the idea came because I had witnessed I guess, a series of media attacks on a very high profile woman. And I'd seen this happen. She had been chairing the board of a financial institution. The financial institution had been misbehaving, and the Royal Banking Commission had, named them and sort of drawn attention to some pretty shocking systemic issues that were going on. And yeah, there were some absolute failures. But the
Mm.
media, a select portion of the media, were running with criticism of this woman's beauty regime and how she networked her way to the top, as though they were the things that were at fault. And it comes back to this: when we criticize people on their appearance or on their person, it really doesn't help. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to make sure that women did lean into high profile roles, that people feel confident when they're putting themselves out there, that they're not going to be criticized personally. And here's some risk mitigation to be able to navigate that more easily.
Yeah, that was a very challenging time in the banking and financial sector. I recall some of those stories, and you're right, it's so interesting, and it happens repeatedly where women are targeted based on how their appearance is, and not never the same with males, and like, it's really frustrating, especially as a a young woman, climbing corporate ladder, trying to grow a career and all these things, and then you're faced with that. It really does make you feel as you say, invisible. So I think this is going to be really helpful for people. And what's been the most surprising feedback you've gotten so far from those who've read it?
Oh, people love that it's practical. So there's lots of worksheets in there, lots of practical activities, and people love that it's practical. It's not rocket science. Like self-promotion isn't rocket science. But
And
I teach. I guess I teach a strategic approach. I talk about uh, be visible. and strategic. We don't want to
Mm,
exhaust ourselves racing around a networking function
yes.
day after day after day. We want to be strategic in front of the right audience at the right time and the right place with those really good key messages. So that
Mm.
is it in a nutshell.
I learned that the hard way recently, actually. I was starting to attend a series of sort of startup mixes and other similar events. And I realized I'm spending all this after hours time away from my daughter, attending these events, not realizing that at this point in life, that those are not the audience that I actually need for what I'm doing, my goal. So I think that's really important and really understated. I think people probably don't really connect the two together. So I think that's a really good call out.
Yeah, great.
So thinking about, sorry, Siri decides to talk midway through. So thinking about those professionals, and as you said, predominantly the women, but this can apply to anyone. What advice do you have for professionals looking to pivot their career or step into new leadership roles? Maybe they're uncertain or they're not quite sure. Maybe they've been in the same role for a long time and they want to go into their own business. What sort of advice can you give them?
Mm-mm. Okay, good question. And it's one I get asked a lot. At the moment, we're in a little bit of an economic downturn. So if you're thinking about changing, see if you can get your current company to invest in the change in you first, as in
Hmm.
try a special project in another area or a secondment to another area within your
Mm,
own company, because you've already got that trusted relationship. You've already got a brand within the organization. So maybe you can get some experience and exposure to something different in your current organization before you springboard into a new organization. Now, the only reason I say that, because in an economic downturn, organizations tend to hire people who've done the job before. So if you're looking to pivot, see
mm,
how you can gain some exposure first, maybe in your current organization or a voluntary role or on a board or a committee somehow before you necessarily try and make the big leap. Of course, never say die. I'm sure that there are people out there who have done that and done it successfully.
mm,
And so it's just a word of warning. And I think it's really helpful at a certain point in your career, get your CV written professionally.
mm.
Your CV and your LinkedIn profile should actually scare you a little bit with how amazing you sound.
Yeah.
That is
Yes.
not lying, it's not cheating, it's all
Yes.
factual. It's
Yes.
just we are too close to our own expertise, our own
Mhm.
results. We forget stuff that's like something comes up and we don't know how to write about them. We're either writing too many boring facts and not enough narrative, or too
Mm,
much narrative and no numbers. Like it's much easier to have someone who's really good at this to help you craft the narrative,
mm,
craft your career tools. So get someone to help you. Plus, there's there's no point in waiting until there's a really your dream role is on the horizon and then going, oh my gosh, I'm going to spend all this time updating my CV on the weekend. That's too late. You
yeah.
need it done in advance. You need to have a sharp career toolkit ready to
Mm.
go well in advance.
The CV and the LinkedIn, I'm not sure if you would advise this as well, but they've got to align because yes, I've interviewed people where their CV, and it's not that it's just out of date, it's just a completely different roles, completely different companies, and it really is a mismatch. So I think from a brand perspective, surely those two have to be
Yeah.
aligned.
Yeah, that is definitely important in terms of branding. It has to be congruent. You've got to be selling the same product.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you're thinking back to your journey of becoming a CEO, you have an interesting perspective about banning bossy. Tell me more about what's ban bossy.
Ban Bossy. Well, you might remember, and it's a while ago now, but Sheryl Sandberg wrote a book called Lean In. And I
Love it.
must admit, while I was planning what to do after my CEOship in the association sector, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And then I had this idea about, oh my gosh, I can help people put themselves out there, speaking, boards, awards, accolades. I can help them do all of that sort of stuff because I've been doing it for years. I just specialize in this sector. And in order to do that, I read one of the books that I read in order to prepare before I launched my business was Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In. And she says, ban bossy. Why this resonated so much for me was because when I am under stress, when I'm under pressure, sometimes I can get like a little bit of a micromanaging behavior going on. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
bit direct.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes people might not like how bossy I become. But telling someone that they're bossy is just chastising them. We need to ban that language. We don't want to tell little girls they were bossy. The reason I don't like it so much is because when I was a kid, my mum used to call me bossy. Stop
Yeah.
being bossy. And
Mm-hmm.
so really resonated for me that message. And I was like, no, I'm on this bandwagon too. Let's ban bossy. We don't want to tell little girls or young women or young career-minded executives that they're being bossy. Let's really unpack the behavior. What's going on here, really? Let's give really specific feedback rather than just say you're being bossy. Let's get rid of that word.
I love that book first of all, the Lean In book. It's fantastic, and I do recall that actually being spoken about. It's so interesting. Like you, I was also told I was very bossy for by my family, by my siblings, and I've never ever heard a man being told he's bossy. I
You're
really
absolutely right. It's a gendered response, isn't it? It's a
yeah.
response to for little girls to keep them playing in their lanes and keep them
Mm.
behaving nicely
Hmm.
because we do have societal expectations on how a little girl should behave and how a little boy should behave. We have those expectations. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's yeah, it's unfortunate, but hopefully, like you said, it can be banned. And I think it's getting better, but I definitely won't be using that with my daughter.
Oh, good.
I wanted to touch on one of the things that I know you in your form when we were doing some collecting of information. You have a story about calling for papers, and there was a bold moment involving a conference call for papers. And you said,
Yeah.
yeah, can you tell us about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I think I alluded to it earlier, and there was this moment I was sitting there, and at the time, I was working in a sector that was, in actual fact, I'd say heavily female dominated in leadership roles. It was customer care, complaints, consumer affairs. So, the women, there were a lot of women in management and leadership. So it was very, very interesting. So, as I did allude to this earlier, I'd call for papers for the conference, and 10 men had put their hand up. And they'd say,
Oh,
pick me, pick me.
yes.
And only one woman. And what was really interesting, and this is perhaps where I think what was really interesting. So the men understood that this was a game of pick me.
Hmm.
Can I workshop the idea with you, Amanda? And they'd be sending me emails saying, here, I've got this idea. What do you think? Could we tailor it? Blah, is this of interest? But none of the women, if they did email me, it had to be with a fully fledged, perfectly formed idea, the précis perfectly done, ready to go. And I think this needing to feel like we're perfect all the time,
Hmm.
needing to be fully prepared, and because we're needing to overprove ourselves because we've got to jump through more hoops in order to be taken seriously. This has consequences. So
Hmm.
that is where that story comes from. The next time someone calls for paper for your industry conference, I challenge you. Just say, pick me. I've got this idea. It starts like this. Would someone be willing to talk it through with me? I'd love to share this case study.
It's very interesting you say that. There is a conference, which I won't name, that I've submitted to speak at a few times. I've had success in others, but this particular one has often given feedback that really doesn't make any sense. And then you look at their agenda, and there's so much more, gender-based male than female speaking, and also repetitive. And so it's really interesting. So I'm always curious, like, how do you get seen? How does your speaking submission get seen? How does it stand out? How does it be different? So, any tips on that for people that are looking to speak at conferences?
I even for my executive level clients, not just my, women who run businesses, but for my executive level clients, I say have a basic bio drafted, get someone to help you, get ChatGPT to help you,
Mhm.
It's amazing the tools that are out there at the moment. And also have one or two topics in your back pocket that are ready to go.
Hmm.
Like perhaps a title, a subheading, and 3 bullet points about what you might talk about. As
Mm.
I said, it doesn't need to be perfect, but have them ready to go. And the best tip is email the conference organizers. The best pro tip I ever heard, and I write about it in the book, is for those who do want to take their speaker career seriously and they want to start doing more speaking gigs, is that it's sort of like a pro tip about being on standby. So you email the organizer, say 2 months before a conference, and you say, hey, I realize that sometimes a speaker can pull out at the last minute. And hand on heart, I did have one conference that I was running where 9 speakers pulled out in the last month before the event. Like, that's a lot. And so as the organizer will probably appreciate knowing that they've got someone on standby. So you say, hey, I realize that sometimes speakers pull out at the last minute. I've got this topic that's almost ready to go. I've delivered it a couple of times internally to my organization and they really like it. I'd be happy to share that with your audience. All I need is 48 hours notice and I'd be happy to be there.
Love it. I'm going to steal that and apply it immediately, because I think there's a few conferences where they're probably out of reach to some degree, that seem a bit out of reach. And maybe that's the lack of confidence speaking there. But I think having that's a really good tip. I love it. I'm going to definitely check out your book to see what other tips you've got in there like that one. Amanda, we're almost at the end of our time together. My last question for you today, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners? A call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder?
Okay, in terms of your branding and career journey, I think the biggest thing that gets in the way is that we just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't take action on it. I think we're very good at doing our job. We know the importance of work-life balance, so we work at that. We know the importance of having an identity outside of work. We're busy. We know the importance of doing a really good job at work. But one of the things that we forget to do is focus on that career strategy. And I really encourage people to really, have a think about, where are you going? What are you aiming for? Because how will you know when you get there if you don't know what you're aiming for? You won't even know if you're on the right track. So have a think about it. Do something that's like 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, maybe even 10 years. Map it out. There's a bunch of things you could have underpinning that, like what you want, why you want it, how much money you want, what are the gaps that or the steps that you might need to have done in order to get there. Map that out and share it with your boss. It's so important. It's so helpful. Your boss won't necessarily, if they're a good one, won't feel threatened. They'll want to help you achieve that. And it's an amazing tool. So I think that would be the advice. Do you have some sort of plan for your career?
It's a really good call out. It relates to a comment one of my other guests had recently, where he talked about treating your career as a project, and actually planning it out like you would a typical project, whether you're building a house, etc. So it really resonated with people. But key word in what you just said, action. I love that. Don't consume all this content, all this information, and not do anything with it. So I think that will definitely really resonate. Where is the best place for people to connect with you and find you?
I'm all over LinkedIn. So connect with me on LinkedIn. Mention that you heard this podcast, because my profile is locked down a bit because I've got a lot of connections, but I love to connect with people. So just work your way around the follow button and say, hey, I saw you on Fatima's podcast. I really like this thing you said here. I love getting feedback like that. And would you like to connect? And I'd be happy to connect with you. So LinkedIn, I have my own website, amandablesing.com. That's a blessing in disguise, blessing with 1 S. And I'd love to connect with your listeners.
Amazing. And I'll make sure I include that in the show notes, and also reference to your book. I wish you the best of success in the next book. Looking forward to reading a bit more about that. But otherwise, I thank you and appreciate all your time today.
Thank you, Fatima. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?